Devon Martinez pressed his face against the cold stone floor of Whispering Caverns, his headlamp cutting through the absolute darkness as he called out desperately into the narrow crevice where his youngest brother had disappeared 3 hours earlier. "Tyler? Tyler!" His voice echoed off the limestone walls, bouncing back to him empty and hollow. Behind him, his middle brother Marcus sat slumped against the cave wall, his red jacket torn and dirty, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead where he'd hit the rock ceiling during their frantic search. The coiled rope lay uselessly beside them, along with Tyler's dropped flashlight, its beam growing dimmer by the hour. They had been exploring caves together since they were kids, but nothing had prepared them for this moment when their adventure had turned into their worst nightmare. Tyler, just 16 years old, had squeezed into that impossibly narrow passage chasing what he thought was another chamber, and now he was gone, swallowed by the mountain itself. The rescue teams would arrive in the morning, but Devon knew in his gut that it would be too late. What none of them realized was that Tyler's disappearance on September 15, 1997, was just the beginning of a mystery that would haunt their small Colorado town for decades and challenge everything people thought they knew about the network of caves beneath Mount Harrison. The day had started like any other weekend adventure for the Martinez brothers. Devon, 18 and the natural leader of the group, had been planning this expedition to Whispering Caverns for weeks. The cave system, located about 20 miles outside their hometown of Cedar Falls, Colorado, was known among local cavers as moderately challenging, but safe for experienced explorers. Devon had been caving since he was 12, and he'd taught his younger brothers everything he knew about rope work, safety protocols, and reading cave formations. Marcus, 17 and always the cautious middle child, had packed extra gear, including emergency flares, first aid supplies, and enough food and water for a full day underground. Tyler, the youngest at 16, was the most adventurous of the three, always pushing to explore just one more passage or squeeze through just one more tight spot to see what lay beyond. They'd parked their beat-up Ford pickup truck at the trailhead around 9 in the morning, the September air crisp with the promise of autumn. Devon wore his lucky bright yellow jacket, the same one he'd worn on every major caving trip since his 14th birthday. Marcus had chosen his blue jacket with multiple pockets for gear, and Tyler sported his red jacket that their mother had bought him the previous Christmas. Each brother carried a blue backpack loaded with essential caving equipment, rope, water, energy bars, and backup lighting. Their headlamps were fully charged, and they each carried a handheld flashlight as backup. The hike to the cave entrance took about 40 minutes through dense pine forest, and they chatted excitedly about their plans to map some of the unexplored passages they'd heard about from other local cavers. Whispering Caverns got its name from the way air moved through its interconnected chambers, creating soft whistling sounds that early settlers thought sounded like voices. The cave system was formed over millions of years by underground water carving through limestone, creating a maze of tunnels, chambers, and tight squeezes that extended deep into Mount Harrison. The main entrance was a horizontal opening about 4 feet high and 6 feet wide, requiring explorers to duck down to enter but opening up into larger passages once inside. Devon had explored the first 3 chambers multiple times before, but today they planned to push deeper into sections he'd only heard about from more experienced cavers. The first few hours underground went exactly as planned. They moved through the familiar chambers with confidence, their headlamps illuminating stunning rock formations, flowstone cascades, and crystalline deposits that sparkled like jewels in the artificial light. Marcus documented their route carefully, making notes in his waterproof notebook and marking key landmarks so they could find their way back. Tyler, as usual, was the first to spot interesting side passages and unusual formations, his youthful enthusiasm infectious even in the confined underground environment. They stopped for lunch in a chamber they nicknamed Cathedral Hall because of its impressive vaulted ceiling and natural acoustics. It was around 2 in the afternoon when they reached a section of the cave that none of them had explored before. The main passage split into 3 different routes, each leading deeper into the mountain. Devon consulted his hand-drawn map, comparing it to the rough sketches other cavers had shared with him. One passage headed steeply downward and was marked as requiring advanced rope work. Another curved to the left and was noted as being partially flooded during certain seasons. The third passage, the one that would change their lives forever, appeared to head gradually upward and was marked simply as tight squeeze, unexplored beyond. Tyler was immediately drawn to the unknown passage. "Come on, Dev," he said, his headlamp beam dancing excitedly across the narrow opening. "This could be our chance to discover something nobody's ever seen before." The opening was roughly oval-shaped, about 2 feet wide and 18 inches high, requiring them to crawl on their bellies to enter. Devon examined the passage carefully, checking for loose rock, adequate airflow, and signs of instability. Everything looked solid, and he could feel air movement indicating that the passage continued beyond what they could see. "All right," Devon decided after a thorough inspection, "but we stick together, and if anyone feels uncomfortable, we back out immediately. No heroics." Marcus nodded agreement, though Devon could see the concern in his brother's eyes. Tyler was already removing his backpack to make himself smaller for the crawl. The brothers squeezed through the narrow passage one by one, with Devon leading the way, followed by Marcus and Tyler bringing up the rear. The limestone walls pressed against their shoulders and backs as they crawled forward on their elbows, their headlamps creating dancing shadows on the rock ahead. After about 30 feet of uncomfortable crawling, the passage opened into a small chamber roughly the size of a bedroom. Devon stood up and stretched, relieved to be out of the tight confines, and immediately noticed something unusual. The chamber had 3 exits, but one of them was completely different from anything they'd seen before. "Guys, look at this!" Devon called, his voice filled with excitement and confusion. The third exit wasn't a natural cave formation at all. It appeared to be a perfectly round hole in the rock wall about 3 feet in diameter, with smooth edges that looked almost machined. The opening was positioned about 4 feet off the chamber floor, and when Devon shined his light into it, the beam seemed to disappear into an impossibly long, straight tunnel. "This doesn't look natural," Marcus observed, running his hands along the smooth edges of the opening. "Caves don't form circular tunnels like this." Tyler was already climbing up to get a better look, his excitement overriding his usual caution. "Maybe it's an old mining shaft," he suggested, though even as he said it, he knew it didn't make sense. There had never been any mining operations in this area, and the smooth walls showed no tool marks or blasting patterns typical of human excavation. Devon felt a strange sensation as he peered into the tunnel, almost like a slight breeze carrying an unfamiliar scent, something sweet and metallic that made his stomach turn slightly. The air movement was definitely coming from deep within the tunnel, suggesting it led to another chamber, or possibly even an exit to the surface. "We should mark this location and come back with more equipment," Marcus said practically, already reaching for his notebook. But Tyler had other ideas. "Come on, it's probably just a short tunnel to another chamber. We've come this far." Before anyone could stop him, Tyler had hoisted himself up and was sliding headfirst into the circular opening. "Tyler, wait!" Devon shouted, but his youngest brother was already disappearing into the tunnel. They could hear him calling back, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "It's not that bad," Tyler's voice came back to them, though it sounded distorted and distant. "I can see the tunnel curving ahead. I think there's a chamber beyond." Devon and Marcus looked at each other with growing concern. This was exactly the kind of impulsive decision-making that made caving dangerous. "Tyler, come back now," Devon called firmly. "We need to stay together." But there was no response. They waited for several minutes, calling Tyler's name repeatedly, but heard only silence. Devon made the decision to follow his brother into the tunnel. The opening was just large enough for him to fit through, though his yellow jacket scraped against the walls as he pulled himself forward. The tunnel was unlike anything he'd ever experienced in a cave. The walls were perfectly smooth, almost glass-like, and seemed to absorb the light from his headlamp rather than reflecting it. After crawling for what felt like 50 feet, the tunnel curved sharply to the right, and Devon found himself in complete darkness even with his light on. The sensation was disorienting and frightening, like being swallowed by the mountain itself. "Tyler!" Devon called out, his voice barely echoing in the strange tunnel. He continued forward, the tunnel now sloping downward at an alarming angle. The air was getting thicker, and that sweet metallic smell was becoming stronger. After another 20 feet, the tunnel suddenly opened into a larger space, and Devon tumbled out onto a sandy floor. He quickly got to his feet and looked around with his headlamp, but what he saw made no sense at all. He was standing in a vast underground chamber, but it wasn't like any cave chamber he'd ever seen. The walls appeared to be made of the same smooth material as the tunnel, and they curved upward into darkness beyond the reach of his light. Most disturbing of all, there was no sign of Tyler anywhere. Devon spent the next hour searching the chamber frantically, calling his brother's name until his voice was hoarse. He found Tyler's headlamp on the sandy floor near where the tunnel opened into the chamber, but there was no other trace of him. The chamber had several other openings, but they were all too high up on the walls to reach without climbing equipment. The floor was covered with fine sand that showed no footprints despite Devon walking all over it. It was as if Tyler had simply vanished into thin air. When Devon finally crawled back through the tunnel to rejoin Marcus, he was pale and shaking. "He's gone," Devon said simply. "I found his headlamp, but Tyler's just gone." Marcus immediately wanted to go into the tunnel himself, but Devon stopped him. "We need to get help, real help. Something's not right about that place." They spent another 2 hours trying to reach Tyler through the tunnel opening, taking turns calling his name and listening for any response. As their own equipment began to fail and the batteries in their backup lights started to dim, they made the difficult decision to leave the cave and get professional rescue teams. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button because this story takes an even more incredible turn that you won't want to miss. The hike back to their truck took twice as long as usual, with both brothers stumbling through the forest in near darkness, their remaining flashlight batteries dying one by one. Marcus kept looking back toward the mountain, as if expecting to see Tyler emerge from the tree line behind them. Devon drove the winding mountain roads faster than he should have, both hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he tried to process what had happened in that impossible chamber. When they reached the Cedar Falls Sheriff's Department at nearly midnight, Deputy Sarah Chen took their report with the kind of professional skepticism that comes from years of dealing with outdoor emergencies. "So you're telling me your brother crawled into a tunnel and just disappeared," Chen said, looking up from her notepad. "No sounds, no indication of where he went, just vanished." Devon nodded, knowing how crazy it sounded but unable to explain it any other way. "The tunnel leads to this chamber that doesn't look like any cave I've ever seen. It's all wrong. The walls, the shape, everything." Marcus added his own observations about the smooth circular opening and the strange air currents, but Devon could see the deputy's expression growing more doubtful with each detail. Chen had dealt with lost hikers and cavers before, and she knew that panic and darkness could make people see things that weren't there. The search and rescue operation began at dawn the next morning. Team leader Captain Rodriguez brought 8 experienced rescuers, along with advanced caving equipment, communication devices, and enough supplies for an extended underground operation. Devon and Marcus led them back to Whispering Caverns, both brothers carrying extra gear and hoping desperately that Tyler had somehow found his way back to a familiar part of the cave system during the night. The rescue team was efficient and professional, but Devon could sense their growing confusion as they approached the chamber where Tyler had disappeared. "Show me this tunnel," Rodriguez said when they reached the small chamber. Devon pointed to the perfectly round opening, but what he saw made his blood run cold. The opening was gone. Where the smooth circular tunnel had been just hours before, there was now solid rock wall, as if the passage had never existed at all. "It was right here," Devon said frantically, running his hands over the limestone surface. "I swear to you there was a tunnel right here." Marcus confirmed his brother's account, describing the exact location and dimensions of the opening, but the rescue team found nothing except natural cave wall. Rodriguez was patient but firm. "Son, I've been doing cave rescue for 15 years. Sometimes when people are scared and disoriented underground, they can get confused about locations, especially in complex cave systems like this one." He directed his team to conduct a thorough search of every passage and chamber in the known cave system. using advanced equipment to check for any spaces they might have missed. They spent 3 full days mapping and exploring every accessible part of Whispering Caverns, calling Tyler's name and listening for any response. They found nothing. The official search was called off after a week, though volunteers continued looking for another 10 days. Tyler Martinez was declared missing, and the case remained open, but without any concrete leads or evidence of what had happened to him. There was little more the authorities could do. Devon and Marcus returned to the cave dozens of times over the following weeks, searching desperately for any sign of the tunnel or their missing brother. They brought metal detectors, borrowed geological survey equipment, and even convinced a friend with demolition experience to check for hidden passages behind the rock wall. Every effort turned up nothing. The loss tore the Martinez family apart. Their parents blamed themselves for letting the boys go caving without adult supervision. Devon was consumed with guilt, replaying every decision from that day and wondering what he could have done differently. Marcus threw himself into research, spending hours at the library and later online, looking for any similar cases or unexplained disappearances in cave systems. He found scattered reports of strange tunnels and missing cavers dating back decades, but nothing concrete enough to help Tyler's case. The town of Cedar Falls slowly moved on, though Tyler's disappearance became part of local folklore. Some people believed the boys had made up the story about the mysterious tunnel to cover up a more mundane accident. Others whispered about supernatural explanations, though most residents dismissed such talk as nonsense. The Martinez brothers tried to return to normal life, but Devon dropped out of his senior year of high school, and Marcus became increasingly isolated from his friends. October passed, then November, and the first snows of winter began to cover Mount Harrison. If you're finding this mystery as compelling as we are, make sure to like this video and let us know in the comments what you think happened to Tyler. December arrived with unusually heavy snowfall that closed many of the mountain roads around Cedar Falls. Devon had taken a job at Morrison's hardware store in town, mainly to keep his mind occupied while Marcus finished his senior year in a haze of grief and obsession. The brothers rarely talked about Tyler anymore, not because they'd forgotten him, but because the pain was too raw and the mystery too impossible to solve. Their parents had started seeing a grief counselor, and there was talk of the family moving away from Cedar Falls entirely, leaving behind all the memories and unanswered questions. On December 18th, exactly 3 months and 3 days after Tyler's disappearance, Jake Morrison was closing up his grandfather's hardware store when he noticed someone standing outside in the snow, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. The figure appeared to be a young man, slight of build, wearing what looked like a red jacket. Jake called out, "Hey, we're closed, but if it's an emergency, I can help you." The figure didn't respond, just stood there motionless in the falling snow. When Jake stepped outside for a better look, the person was gone, leaving no footprints in the fresh powder. The next morning, Sarah Chen got the first call. Mrs. Patterson, who lived on Elm Street near the town center, reported seeing a young man in a red jacket standing in her backyard around 3 in the morning. "He was just standing there by my garden shed," she told the deputy. "I watched him for maybe 5 minutes through my bedroom window, and he never moved. When I went to get a better look, he wasn't there anymore." Chen took the report, though she didn't think much of it initially. People saw things in winter storms sometimes, especially elderly residents who spent too much time alone. But the calls kept coming. Over the next week, 7 different people reported seeing the same young man in the red jacket. Always at night, always standing motionless in residential areas around town, always disappearing when approached directly. The sightings followed a pattern, moving from the commercial district near the hardware store gradually toward the residential neighborhoods on the east side of town where the Martinez family lived. Chen started to worry when she realized the description matched Tyler Martinez exactly. On Christmas Eve, Devon was walking home from his shift at the hardware store when he saw his brother. Not Marcus, who was at home helping their mother prepare for a subdued holiday dinner, but Tyler. He was standing under the streetlight at the corner of Pine and Main, wearing the same red jacket he'd disappeared in 3 months earlier. Devon's heart stopped. Tyler looked exactly the same as the day he'd vanished. No thinner, no sign of having survived outdoors through a harsh Colorado winter. His skin was pale, almost luminous in the artificial light, and his eyes stared straight ahead without blinking. "Tyler," Devon whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. His brother didn't respond, didn't even seem to see him. Devon moved closer, his footsteps echoing off the empty buildings lining Main Street. "Tyler, it's me, it's Devon." Still no response. When Devon was about 10 feet away, Tyler turned and walked calmly toward the alley behind Brennan's pharmacy. Devon broke into a run, following his brother into the narrow passage between buildings. The alley was empty. No footprints in the snow. No sign that anyone had been there at all. Devon ran home, bursting through the front door and shouting for his parents and Marcus. "I saw him. I saw Tyler. He's alive." The family gathered in the living room as Devon described the encounter, his words tumbling over each other in excitement and confusion. Marcus was skeptical at first, but when Devon described Tyler's exact appearance and clothing, down to the small tear in the left shoulder of his red jacket, Marcus became a believer. "We have to go back," Marcus said immediately. "We have to find him." They spent Christmas morning walking through every street in Cedar Falls, looking for any sign of Tyler. They checked the alley behind the pharmacy, the area around the hardware store, and every location where he'd been spotted by other residents. They found nothing, but word spread quickly through the small town. By afternoon, dozens of residents were joining the search, including several who had seen the mysterious figure in the red jacket over the past week. Deputy Chen interviewed Devon extensively about his sighting, comparing his account to the other reports she'd received. The details matched perfectly, but the implications were troubling. If it really was Tyler Martinez, where had he been for 3 months and why was he appearing around town like some kind of ghost? Chen contacted the state police and requested assistance from specialists who dealt with missing persons cases involving unusual circumstances. The story reached the local newspaper, then regional news outlets. By New Year's Day, Cedar Falls was flooded with reporters, paranormal investigators, and curious tourists, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the missing boy who had apparently returned from wherever he'd been. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will completely change how you think about this entire mystery. The media attention turned Cedar Falls into a circus. News vans lined Main Street, and reporters knocked on doors throughout the residential neighborhoods, asking residents about their encounters with the boy in the red jacket. The Martinez family found themselves under intense scrutiny, with journalists camping outside their house and following them to work and school. Devon quit his job at the hardware store because he couldn't handle the constant questions and camera crews. Marcus skipped the last week of classes before winter break resumed, unable to concentrate on anything except finding his missing brother. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a psychiatrist specializing in trauma and missing persons cases, arrived from Denver on January 3rd to evaluate the situation. She interviewed each family member separately, as well as several witnesses who claimed to have seen Tyler. Her initial assessment was that the family was experiencing shared delusions brought on by grief and guilt, but the sheer number of independent sightings from unrelated witnesses gave her pause. "In my experience," she told Deputy Chen, "mass hallucinations typically involve groups of people who know each other and have discussed the subject extensively. These witnesses had no contact with each other, and many didn't even know about Tyler's disappearance until after they reported their sightings. On January 6th, the sightings suddenly stopped. For 2 weeks, no one reported seeing the boy in the red jacket anywhere in Cedar Falls. The media attention began to fade, and most of the reporters packed up and left town. Dr. Warren extended her stay, intrigued by the pattern of appearances and disappearances. She spent hours interviewing longtime residents about the history of Mount Harrison and Whispering Caverns, looking for any similar incidents or local legends that might explain what was happening. That's when Marcus made his discovery. While researching in the basement archives of the Cedar Falls Historical Society, he found a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1952 with the headline, "3 Local Boys Missing After Cave Exploration." The article described the disappearance of the Brennan brothers, ages 14, 16, and 17, who had gone exploring in what the newspaper called the caves beneath Mount Harrison. The boys had been missing for 2 weeks when the article was written, and a follow-up piece from 3 weeks later confirmed that they were never found. Marcus brought the clipping to Dr. Warren, who immediately contacted the state archives for more information. What they discovered was disturbing. Dating back to 1890, there were documented cases of people disappearing in the cave systems around Mount Harrison roughly every 15 to 20 years. Always young people, usually in small groups, always with the same pattern. Initial disappearance, extensive search efforts that found no trace, then sporadic sightings around Cedar Falls for several weeks before the missing people vanished permanently. The 1932 case involved 2 teenage girls who had been exploring caves for a school geology project. Witnesses reported seeing them walking through downtown Cedar Falls 3 months after their disappearance, wearing the same clothes they'd vanished in, but the girls never responded to anyone who tried to approach them. The 1913 case described a 20-year-old man who had been prospecting in the mountain caves when he disappeared. Like Tyler, he was spotted throughout the town for about a month, always at night, always unresponsive to attempts at contact. Dr. Warren compiled all the historical data and presented her findings to a joint meeting of local and state law enforcement. "We're dealing with a pattern that spans more than a century," she explained. "Every case involves disappearances in the cave systems, followed by what witnesses describe as ghostly appearances in town. The missing people are always seen wearing the same clothing they disappeared in. They never age or show signs of exposure, and they never respond to direct contact." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Deputy Chen was the first to speak. "Are you suggesting that Tyler Martinez is dead, and we're dealing with some kind of supernatural phenomenon?" Dr. Warren chose her words carefully. "I'm suggesting that we're dealing with something that doesn't fit our normal understanding of missing persons cases. Whether that's supernatural, psychological, or something else entirely, I can't say." She paused, looking around the room at the skeptical faces. "But I can tell you that based on the historical pattern, if Tyler follows the same timeline as previous cases, we should expect the sightings to end permanently within the next 2 weeks." As if summoned by her words, Tyler appeared one final time that very night. Multiple witnesses saw him standing in the town square at exactly midnight, his red jacket bright against the snow-covered ground. This time, instead of disappearing when approached, he stood perfectly still as dozens of residents gathered around him. Devon and Marcus pushed through the crowd, reaching their brother at the same time. Up close, Tyler looked exactly as he had 3 months earlier, but his eyes were completely black, reflecting no light at all. Devon reached out to touch his brother's shoulder, but his hand passed right through Tyler's body as if he were made of air. Tyler turned his head slowly, looking directly at each of his brothers for the first time since his disappearance. His mouth opened, and he spoke in a voice that sounded like wind echoing through stone tunnels. "Don't follow me," he said simply. Then he walked calmly toward the edge of town, passing right through a parked car and disappearing into the darkness beyond the streetlights. If this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves unsolved mysteries.